Hello and welcome to this design battle between Final Fantasy XV and the recently released Final Fantasy VII Remake, where we will be looking at the combat and seeing what one might do better than the other. I will be giving you my opinion and I hope that you end up sharing yours as well, so let's see what these Square Enix juggernauts bring to the table. It's clear from the moment you lay eyes on these titles that the combat in them looks cool, but what makes them tick, and how fun is each system? To answer that question, we'll have to go back to the basics before doing a deep dive. Whenever you're looking at something like combat, it's important to understand what type of combat the game is trying to achieve. And I found myself confused when I first saw gameplay trailers for these titles, as they looked nothing like the Final Fantasy that I knew with its turn-based combat. The mainline titles have a rich history with expanding on that style of combat, and started to stray away from it with Final Fantasy XI. This is a part of the series that I have no personal experience in, and as such, I only knew Final Fantasy as turn-based RPGs. Imagine my surprise when I saw gameplay trailers for FF15. It got me so excited about what I saw, a Final Fantasy game with hack-and-slash combat system. Being a fan of titles like Devil May Cry, and to get a mix of that and Final Fantasy seemed like a perfect match. But in retrospect, I'm quite happy that the games didn't end up going that route. Not only because of the way that it would alienate a huge part of the existing fanbase, but it would be too big of a departure from the series' roots. Nowadays, it's clear that what the games are trying to achieve is to be an action RPG. But even so, there are so many different types of action RPGs that do a lot of different things, and trying to get a grasp of which game managed to hit the marks best would be impossible without setting a clear distinction on what makes a good action RPG. The following portion of the video will be me dissecting the genre in a way that I believe to be fair. This won't be something that the gaming community as a whole agree upon, and your opinions on what makes an ARPG may differ, but at least you will know where I'm coming from. And hey, if you disagree, you can always let me know where you think I messed up. If you're absolutely not interested by this, even though I believe it will help give better context to the analysis I do on the games, you can skip to this part of the video. In order to get a grasp of ARPGs, I will be using Monster Hunter World as an example. The way the game is set up allows me to make my point in a clear and concise way. Monster Hunter makes use of a very divided structure. You're either in camp or you're in an area where you can fight monsters. In camp, you can make choices on a large scale, which include picking weapon type, equipping gear, setting decorations, picking tools, eating food, setting your palette go up for success, and making sure you have the necessary items in order to fight the monsters more efficiently. Out in the wild though, choices shrink in scale, but not importance. The game plays in real time, with attacking, dodging, blocking, and making good use of your items and tools becoming your only concerns. A player that only grasps one of these gameplay moments will always be lacking, as the preparations before a hunt can make massive changes to your ability to take on monsters. But everything will be for nothing if you don't have the mechanical skill in order to make use of the situation that you've put yourself in through your preparations. The combination of choices made before battle and the execution of a given combat plan once within battle is what makes a good action RPG to me. With that said, we'll be moving on to the fantasies and looking at the systems in place that facilitate the criteria laid out for the genre. And as such, there will be what I'd call small spoilers from an encounter perspective, but I'll stay away from story completely and do my best to keep any encounters to early ones. And in order to spare you from hearing me say Final Fantasy over and over again for the rest of the video, I will be referring to the titles by 15 and 7. Also, I want to add in the caveat that the analysis that I will be making here will be based on the state that 15 was in when it was first released, rather than with all the added functionality that has come throughout its years out on the market, as I feel like that's the most fair comparison we can make. In this section, we will be focusing on basic attacks, and therefore I want to start out by looking at the most basic combo that both games has to offer in order to get a feel of both of them. The attacks in both games are of course functional and serve their purpose well as the basic functionality of combat. Both systems manage to look cool, but there is a clear difference in weight between the different games, so let's start by looking at 15. The game feel is what I'd call a mixed bag. There is so much good in here that it pains me to have to refer to it in such a way. The game's action looks spectacular. From magic having environmental effects that make them feel like they are part of something bigger than just a point of damage to the great animation work. 15 manages to tick all the boxes to make it look like the player's actions have reactions. This is further strengthened by the melee combat. Switching weapons on the fly gives the player a lot of control to freely change up how they want to approach an encounter in the heat of battle. Doing a combo in this game is pure eye candy, and it's built upon with the multiple different ways that you can choose to attack. Each weapon holds multiple built-in combos that you can weave through in order to create something that looks unique, and on top of that you can also switch between different weapons on the fly to come up with creative uses. But the coolest part of the system to me has to be the Warp Strike. It acts as an offensive move, a target switch, and escape all in one while being one of the defining visual features of the game. With these bases covered, it lends itself as a great tool to handle aerial combat. With the world of 15 being as it is, gravity is a factor, and as such, whenever you get up into the air, you will eventually come down as well. But the Warp Strike allows you to chase down aerial enemies without resetting on the ground, as well as allowing you to finish an enemy off in the air only to strike another opponent the next second, rather than falling back down to the ground, walking over to your enemy, and resuming combos. All of these positives are heavily burdened by one thing though: holding a button to hit. Although seemingly minor, this choice of input comes with a lot of baggage. It stops you from feeling like you're actually comboing. In a way, it's comparative to hitting a nail with a hammer. Hitting the nail every time gives you feedback every time you hit the nail, causing you to make adjustments to your angle and power along the way. But in 15, it's more like you're deciding to hammer down a nail only to get an out-of-body experience where you get to see it happen, and then getting control back of your body once the nail is in place. This lack of feedback blurs the line between one attack ending and another one starting, meaning the combos that are possible in this game feeling more imprecise than they could have. You could argue that I just need to get good and learn when different attacks start and stop by looking at the animations, but I just can't see why each attack couldn't be tied to separate button presses, and it sadly drags down a system that has so much going for it. 7 fixes this. Each attack is tied to a button press, which gives you clear knowledge and feedback on what you're doing. And on top of that, it builds on the feedback that was given in 15, with animations and effects feeling like they have more weight behind them and giving you a solid base to start on. But the game stumbles in the basic combo options after that. Where 15 had multiple ways to take a combo using on-the-fly weapon switching and different combo routes being possible, 7 has one, with some exceptions. Let me explain. Cloud is a character with 2 modes, Operator Mode and Punisher Mode, where both of the modes make use of unique animations and are loaded with heavy damaging finishers, which really incentivizes you to go through the whole combo in order to do good damage. A common route that I would take while playing through the game was to do a basic combo, and after doing the finisher I'd link it with one more attack which is accessible by holding down the attack button. Switching from Operator Mode to Punisher Mode takes a surprisingly long amount of time, which to me kills the momentum of the combo, but switching from Punisher to Operator Mode makes Cloud do an attack, and it can be done by dodging as well. This makes switching from Punisher to Operator way more fluid and in general more enjoyable. Barret and Aerith are both primarily ranged characters, where you hold down the button in order to get to the end of the barrage, and then restarting. Tifa is the character that I had the most fun with, as she has the skill Unbridled Strength. With this ability, she gets access to 3 different combo routes, one where she's at level 0, another one at level 1, and so on. While being in a higher level, you can do one combo, use her signature ability which brings her down a level, and do a different combo. This sadly only works in one way, and there's no way to chain into the higher levels without taking a break from the combo to perform her Unbridled Strength. I only brought up this ability here as it's the only ability in the game which can switch out the basic combos of a character, and I'd say it's fair to compare to Cloud's mode switching as such. Switching between characters is a really cool system that I enjoy a lot. I feel like it's a bit of a shame though that it takes as much time as it does. The system right now does a slowdown as the camera moves to the character that you're taking control over. Much like Cloud switching to the Punisher mode, this takes a bit too long in order to be really comparable to how fluid the weapon switching in 15 is. As such, it takes away a bit of the feeling of working in sync as a team that's taken down their foes. And the last thing that I want to touch on with the basic attacks is that hitting flying enemies is a bit hit or miss. Literally and figuratively. When you press the button to hit a flying enemy with a melee attack, the character launches up in their direction, and if the enemy decided to move in that moment, your only option is to drop down to the ground and try again, or switch to a ranged character to shoot them out of the sky, which is much more reliable. Now, after all of that, it might seem like I hate the basic attacks of 7, but I want us to take another look at the clip that we started out this section with. The improvement made to the feedback on the attacks is very noticeable, and as such, even though the basic combos may be repetitive, it carries itself very well and manages to make the combat enjoyable even though it's very repetitive within the space of its basic attacks. And it more than makes up for it within the category that we're going to look at next. As I mentioned in the last section, I think that switching between characters is a good system overall. This being because of the depth that it allows. Switching to a healthy character while allowing your less healthy characters to heal up is a great on-the-fly decision to make, as well as choosing the correct person for the job. Sometimes you might want to counter and then Cloud stands in the spotlight. Other times it might be better to switch to Barret or Aerith in order to deal with some flying enemies, or maybe you just want to really punish a staggered enemy and then Tifa is there to bring the pain. After all, it makes sense that one character can't do everything well, and it helps to solidify the team as a group of friends that are covering for each other's shortcomings. The ATB system is probably my favorite addition to the combat between 15 and 7. It manages to do so many things while being relatively simple. First of all, it supports the basic attacks by spending your ATB gauges on attacking abilities, which allows you to make your combos chain into different finishers where you might choose different abilities depending on what situation you're in. Secondly, it's used for casting magic as well, which are often used in order to put your opponents into a vulnerable state so you can continue to batter them. And on top of that, it's used for items as well. As such, almost all healing in the game is tied to the ATB system, and the gauges fill up during battle, which leaves you with the decision of whether to use your gauges offensively or defensively. This means tension in a fight can get very high if you're ever put in a position where your party members are down for the count and you don't have any gauges left. And lastly, we have the summon system, which also uses the ATB gauge to summon, but it's limited to contextualized battles where you're allowed to summon. Even so, there's strategy to be used whenever a summon is, well, summoned. You can choose to use gauges in order to get more out of your summon, or you might have called it at a time where you were having issues and brought it in so you could get some breathing room to heal your party up, and in exchange the summon does less damage than it potentially could have done. I really don't have anything negative to say about the strategic choices while in battle, as they carry weight and you can be really creative with how you approach a battle. Sometimes the strategy by itself is enough to turn an enemy that you were having issues with into one that you easily best as you figure out how to get rid of them efficiently. But boy do I have some issues with how 15 handles strategic depth while in battle. Since we just talked about how summons worked in 7, we might as well bring up the fact that in 15 you either use them or not, with there being no upside to not using them. There are certain conditions that need to be met in order to summon, but those conditions generally seem random and aren't something that you're likely planning for, but they will happen sometimes and you'll get a pretty cinematic for it. During the encounters, your teammates will get access to their techniques by building a bar. The techniques have to be selected before battle, leaving you with 3 options in each encounter. The bar is shared between the whole party, and as such we do get some thoughts in regards to tactics through the system. You might want to use defensive abilities on some teammates and offensive on others to give yourself the option of strategic depth. The magic system in this game is largely handled as items, and don't really do much outside of being an effective source of elemental damage against certain enemies. And while we're speaking about items, we might as well bring up the fact that you are free to use them as you please throughout the battle, which puts no real weight behind the consumption of it. You can even use a Phoenix down on yourself once you've been downed if it gets to that point. Because of the free use of items, the game is left in a state where each encounter is a test on whether you're high enough level to where you do enough damage and can take enough damage to make an encounter worth it. Strategizing within the scope of a battle doesn't make much of a difference, leading the game's combat to be too heavily dependent on the basic attack combos. This brings us to the final part of the video, and the other part that I defined as a necessary component of an action RPG. In 15 there really wasn't much to do in order to prepare for battles in interesting ways. Of course, you'd level up and get better stats as the game went on, but that can't really be considered a choice. There's different gear in the game which you can choose between, but for the most part it felt like you were just upgrading as you went on rather than making a choice about a weapon that fits you. And lastly, there's the skill tree, which granted you different abilities and stat increases, so there is some thought to be had there, but in general, these abilities serve to make you more efficient in battle rather than giving you new ways to think about battle. Thankfully, 7 didn't get caught in the same trap. A lot of it can be attributed to the materia system. Only being able to level up materia that you currently have equipped is great, since it makes you think about whether you want to equip lower level materia in order to level it up so your options are expanded in the future, or if you're better off using materia that you've been leveling up for greater firepower. I was drawn into the system instantly, and it had a strong effect on the game as a whole to me, as I was left with a lot of choices towards the end of how I wanted to equip my party. This is further built upon in the weapon system that the game makes use of. The weapons in this game level up as you go, with new materia slots being added, strengthening unique abilities, giving more MP, physical or magic damage, resistances, and so on. Because the weapons improved as you went through the game, you could pick favorites depending on how you wanted to fight. For instance, with Tifa, I was drawn to weapons that gave a high chance of reaching a higher level when battle started for increased combo options. While I liked Barret and Aerith to have weapons that could hold a lot of materia so I could level those up. And call me a sucker, but I wanted Cloud to use the Buster Sword for style and only switch to master the other weapon abilities. You can also set what character you want to start battle with. I'd switched this around a bit throughout the game and it tied in well with the ATB system. The character you're playing as will be more active than the other characters in the party. As such, they will build more ATB gauge, which I'd often use to my advantage to build up gauges early on with my dedicated healers so that I could go hard with my more damaging characters and know that if a heal was needed, then my healer would always be ready. I could have easily played the game in a very different way had I chosen to. And the fact that I felt like my choices had an impact on how the battles progressed in the long run can only be seen as a huge success for the game as a whole. Overall, I think it's safe to say that both games had some great areas and some where they struggled in. Where 15 excelled in giving the player a lot of options to play around with within their basic attack system and warp striking, and 7 expanding on the weight given to attacks while also massively expanding on the strategy that could be found throughout. Looking at both games as action RPGs, I believe it's clear that 7 did a way better job in incorporating its different systems in order to tie the action and the RPG into one cohesive experience. But this shouldn't be surprising either. 7 was built on the foundation that 15 put in front of it, and it continued to push this as the combat system to be built upon for future Final Fantasy games, as they had once built on the turn-based systems. It makes me very hopeful that the combat in these games has already been so fun, and I can't wait to see where it's taken from this point forward. So what did you like about each combat system, and which one did you prefer in the long run? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the video, in which case you might want to subscribe to the channel for future videos or leave a like. If you didn't enjoy it, then please feel free to let me know in the comments what made you feel that way, as I'm always looking to improve and I'll happily take any feedback you may have. If you're interested in knowing what I'm up to, you can follow me at budding_basil on Twitter. Thank you. Have a great day.